Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, July 18, 2023. Former President Donald Trump, a 2024 Republican presidential candidate, says he received a letter from the Special Counsel Jack Smith telling him he's a target of the grand jury investigation into efforts to overturn the Joe Biden victory in the 2020 presidential election. And Donald Trump says he expects to face criminal charges in this case. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin asked at a town hall meeting in New Hampshire held by the group called No Labels how seriously he's considering running for president on the organization's third-party ticket. A U.S. service member willfully and without authorization crosses from South Korea to North Korea, where he is reportedly being held. Many news outlets say that service member had just been released from a South Korean detention center and was supposed to fly to a U.S. military base in Texas. We'll get the latest from the Pentagon, the State Department, and the White House. Some Republican U.S. House members try to repeal presidential emergency declarations dealing with 5 different countries, many of them years old, saying that Congress has not renewed them every 6 months as required. Opponents say removing the emergency declarations also removes the legal basis to sanction terrorists. Israel's president meets President Biden at the White House as the U.S. House takes up a resolution declaring Israel is not a racist state, a reference to comments that Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal made this past weekend. Plus, General Mark Milley, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, with an update on the Ukrainian military's counteroffensive against Russia, and the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Jared Bernstein, on why Americans are not feeling upbeat about the economy, despite the data. From Axios.com, former President Donald Trump said Tuesday that he received a letter from Special Counsel Jack Smith informing him that he is a target of the grand jury investigation into efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. It would mark the second set of federal charges against Donald Trump following Jack Smith's indictment of the former president last month over his handling of classified documents. That from Axios. Donald Trump posting on his social media site, deranged Jack Smith, the prosecutor with Joe Biden's DOJ, sent a letter stating that I am a target of the January 6th grand jury investigation and giving me a very short 4 days to report to the grand jury, which almost always means an arrest and indictment. That was the statement from Donald Trump. Reaction to all this from U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
Trump says he got a target letter from the January 6th prosecutor and says in 4 days he has to report to the grand jury. So do you have any reaction?
Well, I guess under a Biden administration, Biden America, you'd expect this. If you notice recently, President Trump went up in the polls and was actually surpassing President Biden for re-election. So what do they do now? Weaponize government to go after their number one opponent. It's time and time again. I think the American public is tired of this. They want to see equal justice, and the idea that they utilize this to go after those who politically disagree with them is wrong.
But do you think, can I ask a separate question?
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, with reporters today on Capitol Hill. Washington Post article has this: a target letter from prosecutors means investigators have gathered substantial evidence linking the recipient to a crime, but it does not necessarily mean charges will ultimately be brought. Often such letters invite the target to appear before a grand jury to offer evidence. Donald Trump said this week he was asked if he wishes to appear before the grand jury, and a Donald Trump advisor said he does not plan to testify. The former president did not indicate what the charges against him could be, and it is unclear if the target letter specified that. That from the Washington Post. The House Democratic Caucus Chair, Pete Aguilar, got this question from a reporter today at his news conference.
Mr. Chairman, based on your unique 18 months on the Select Committee, what do you make of the news that Trump got a target letter?
I don't think it's surprising. I think the committee laid out, and you'll remember this, Scott, we said time and time again our focus was to seek the truth and to make sure that there's accountability. We also said very clearly that there were some tools that could be utilized only by the Department of Justice that were not available to us in our Select Committee. So we're appreciative of the work of the Department of Justice and their focus on staying true to finding the facts and holding people accountable. Their track record has been very solid when it comes to prosecutions, and we expect that the target letter and the work that the grand jury continues to do will meet that threshold of seeking the facts and holding people accountable, no matter where they are and no matter who they are.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, caucus chair and also a former member of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, getting a question from CBS congressional correspondent Scott McFarland at today's news conference. CNN reports that West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, on Monday defended his flirtation with a third-party presidential campaign, telling voters at a no-labels forum at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire that he had no plans to play spoiler in the 2024 election. Sitting beside former Utah Governor John Huntsman, a Republican, Senator Manchin railed against withering bipartisanship in Washington, D.C., saying the business model of the two major parties is better if you're divided. That from CNN. The moderator for this program in Manchester, New Hampshire was Kevin Cirilli, Scripps News political correspondent.
We are in New Hampshire, and we are with New Hampshire voters, and you have said that you are considering running for president, and I'm not, no.
I gotta give you credit, God. You're not gonna I love you, Kevin, baby. Let's go.
In all seriousness, truthfully, what goes in, this is the most important job in the world. What goes into that decision?
If we're able to basically show with how many responses, Nancy, with 10,000 or more surveys across the country, more than that, 50,000 surveys across the country. We'll do 50,000 more surveys. If we're showing you the common sense that most Americans want to be governed by, and neither is doing that, and we can't push them back to the middle, that'll be a time to make a decision, whether it's me or anybody else. We're not here. I'm not here running for president tonight. I'm not. I'm here trying to basically save the nation. I'm concerned more now than I've ever been concerned in my lifetime. I have 3 children and 10 grandchildren. A tremendous amount of friends and colleagues. I'm concerned and they're concerned. But I'm in a position where I had a woman one time say, Joe, you don't know how bad things look. And I said, really? She says, yeah. And I said, make sure I understand. You're talking about politics. Yes. You're sitting at home after a good dinner, sitting down watching television and saying, my God, that's awful. Try it from my seat. Try it from my seat. And then have to go through. So yeah, I want to do things. My vote is very unpredictable because I vote on facts. If it makes sense and I can go home and explain, I'm going to vote for it. If I can't explain, I'm not. They can't pressure me. They've tried. They've done everything they can. They can't do it. I told them one time, we'll play Russian roulette, load all the bullets, and pull the trigger because I'm not changing. I know what's coming and I'm not changing. So you have to have the backbone. You know why? I'm not afraid of losing. The sacrifice I make tonight, I'm not afraid of. Thank you. Thank you all.
Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, Monday night in Manchester, New Hampshire at a town hall hosted by the group No Labels, which is considering running a third-party presidential campaign with a bipartisan ticket. Also on Monday, a group of prominent Democrats and Republicans formed another group to oppose the No Labels effort. They named their group Citizens to Save Our Republic, and those prominent people include former House Democratic leader Dick Gephardt and former Republican senators and defense secretaries Chuck Hagel and Bill Cohen. They say internal polls show that if Republicans nominate Donald Trump and Democrats nominate Joe Biden for president, a no-labels candidate could draw enough votes that otherwise would have gone to Joe Biden to give Donald Trump a victory. The No Labels founder and CEO Nancy Jacobson was interviewed today by NBC correspondent Vaughn Hilliard.
I've talked to allies who have backed your effort for the last 13 years and say that your mission is pure and good. But they said they're concerned come November of 2024, waking up that next morning, and that Donald Trump is in the White House because of No Labels efforts. What will you say after the 2024 election if Donald Trump is back in there?
I will tell you right now.
As a Democrat.
As a Democrat, categorically, that will not happen. This effort will pull it down. We will not spoil for either side. The only reason to do this is to win. And we see, the numbers are, there's a political earthquake. And that's really what's going on out there. A political earthquake in this country. Citizens all across this country don't want the choices, and they're becoming disengaged. And having our citizenry becoming disengaged That's dangerous. And the truth is, there's no reason in this country the time cannot be ripe, because we see it every day. Hundreds of thousands of people have already signed this petition. There is so much interest, and it's palpable, for what the American community wants.
Nancy Jacobson is No Label's founder and CEO in an NBC News interview today. The invitation at nolabels.org reads, "Had enough of the angriest voices dominating our politics? Join a movement where every voice counts." And President Joe Biden's 2024 re-election campaign announced today that the campaign will be based in Wilmington, Delaware, where he has a home. His 2020 campaign was headquartered in Philadelphia. This is Washington Today. And now to the U.S. service member who crossed from South Korea to North Korea and is reportedly in custody in North Korea, according to U.S. and UN officials. ABC News writes that a U.S. official confirms to them that the soldier is 23-year-old Private Travis King, who was released from a South Korean detention facility after an altercation with locals, was escorted to the Incheon International Airport as far as the customs checkpoint. The military escort had no ticket and was not allowed past that checkpoint, so Travis King continued alone. But instead of boarding a flight, as expected, to Fort Bliss, Texas, he left the terminal for a tour of the DMZ, demilitarized zone between South and North Korea, and then crossed the border. Here's U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at a news conference today, asked about this case.
Yeah, what I can confirm, and I would say up front that we're very early in this event, and so there's a lot that we're still trying to learn. But what we do know is that one of our service members who was on a tour willfully and without authorization crossed the military demarcation line. We believe that he is in the BRK custody. And so we're closely monitoring and investigating the situation and working to notify the soldiers next of kin and engaging to address this incident. In terms of my concerns, I'm absolutely foremost concerned about the welfare of our troops. And so we will remain focused on this, and again, this will develop in the next several days and hours, and we'll keep you posted. So.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at a Pentagon news conference. At the State Department, spokesperson Matthew Miller also asked how the State Department is involved.
I know that you guys are not really the lead agency on this, but what is the State Department's role in the situation with the North Korea and this service person who...
Right now, we are in touch with the Department of Defense. As you noted, it was a U.S. service member who willfully and without authorization crossed into North Korea. The Department of Defense is, of course, in the lead because it's a member of their personnel, and we are in touch with them to offer whatever assistance may be appropriate.
Yeah, but I mean, have you been, well, so you're only in touch with the military? You're not in touch with the South Koreans? You haven't tried to get in touch with the North Koreans?
At this point, I'm sure that we are in touch with the South Koreans. We have regular ongoing conversations with them. I will say, at this point, we have not reached out. The State Department has not reached out to the North Koreans or other governments. It is our understanding that the Pentagon has reached out to their counterparts in the DPRK. They're the lead agency, and I will defer to them to comment on the nature of those contacts.
Who are the Pentagon's counterparts?
I will defer to the Pentagon for that to answer that question.
Do they have any? Like,
I will refrain from speaking for the Pentagon from here.
Just one quick follow-up
Yeah.
on that. So you said at this point, state hasn't reached out to the North Koreans or other governments, though you guys have regular contacts with the South Koreans. Are you saying that the U.S. hasn't reached out to China regarding this incident specifically?
I am not aware of any such contacts at this point. Again, the Department of Defense is in the lead at this point because it is an active duty serviceman.
Okay.
and you haven't reached out to the Swedes?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So does that mean that this hasn't gotten to the point where you think you...
It has not gotten to the point where let me go back and say, the Department of Defense is in the lead at this point. We are in coordination with them. It has not yet gotten to the point where there is any step that is either appropriate or necessary for us to take, but we will stay in close coordination with them over the next hours. And if there are steps that would be useful for the State Department to take, we, of course, will not hesitate to take those.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at the State Department news conference. And for the White House view, here's Questions to the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
A U.S. soldier who crossed the border into North Korea. AP is reporting that he had been held in a South Korea prison and was supposed to fly to Fort Bliss, Texas to face disciplinary actions. How did he escape the airport, and is he a security risk?
So a couple of things, and I know that the Department of Defense, the Secretary more specifically, spoke to this moments ago, so I have a couple of things to share, and this is something that the Pentagon obviously has already shared. In the afternoon of July 18th, local time, a U.S. soldier on a private JSA orientation tour crossed willfully and without authorization the military demarcation line into the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And we believe the soldier is currently in DPRK custody and are working with our North Korean counterparts to resolve this incident. DOD is in the process of notifying next of kin. Until that is complete, they will not release identification of the soldier. The White House, the Department of Defense, the State Department, and also the UN are all working together to ascertain more information and resolve the situation. I don't have more to share beyond that. We are looking into this, trying to get more information. As I mentioned, the DOD has been in touch with their counterparts, as well as others who are certainly working on this together. Been in touch with the Korean People's Army, as the Department of Defense has done. Just don't have more to share beyond that.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters in the White House briefing room. A Forbes magazine article includes this. The last time an American was held in North Korean custody was in 2018, when Bruce Byron Lawrence was detained for a month after he illegally entered the country from China. In 2016, American student Otto Warmbier was arrested in Pyongyang for allegedly stealing a propaganda poster when visiting the country. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. After being held in North Korea for nearly a year and a half, he was flown back to the U.S. in a coma. He died a week later in June 2017. After his death, the State Department banned Americans from visiting North Korea. U.S. passports are also invalid for travel to or through North Korea unless the State Department has given explicit permission. That reporting from Forbes magazine. You're listening to Washington Today. The Ukrainian military says it shot down 25 exploding drones and 6 cruise missiles launched by Russia towards the port city of Odessa, an operation that Russia calls a strike of retribution for the attack that damaged the bridge connecting Russia to Crimea, which is the Ukrainian territory occupied and annexed by Russia since 2014. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and General Mark Milley, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, led a virtual meeting today of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the 50 or so countries that have been providing Ukraine with military supplies. After, at a Pentagon news conference, General Milley was asked about the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is now just over a month old.
The Russians have had several months to put in a very complex defense in depth, a linear defense in depth. It's not quite connected trench lines like World War I, but it's not dissimilar from that either. Lots of complex minefields, dragon's teeth, barbed wire, trenches, etc. They've got a very extensive security zone in depth, and then they've got at least 2, perhaps even 3 main defensive belts. So they've had a long time to prepare that. Now, they suffered a lot of casualties, the Russians did, to date. So they've also done that mobilization, from months ago. So the troops that are manning those Russian lines are poorly trained, poorly equipped. Their sustainment logistics is not high. The morale is low. And now recently, because of the Prigozhin mutiny, the command and control apparatus at the strategic level is certainly confusing at best and probably challenging in many, many other ways. At the operational and tactical level, they've had significant casualties among their officer corps. But in addition to that, the recent events of Prigozhin has also led to, and you're reporting it in the media, about various folks being replaced. So the Russian situation is not very good, even though they've been fighting a fight because of the minefields. What the Ukrainians have, though, is a significant amount of combat power not yet committed. And I will not say what's going to happen in the future, because that's going to be a Ukrainian decision as to where and when they commit their reserve, etc. Right now, they are preserving their combat power, and they are slowly and deliberately and steadily working their way through all these minefields. And it's a tough fight. It's a very difficult fight. It started about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and the various war games that were done ahead of time have predicted certain levels of advance, and that has slowed down. Why? Because that's a difference between war on paper and real war. These are real people in real machines that are out there really clearing real minefields, and they're really dying. So when that happens, units tend to slow down. And that's rightly so, in order to survive, in order to get through these minefields. So they're working their way through it. It is far from a failure, in my view. I think that it's way too early to make that kind of call. I think there's a lot of fighting left to go, and I'll stay with what we said before. This is going to be long, it's going to be hard, it's going to be bloody, and at the end of the day, we'll see where the Ukrainians end up vis-a-vis the Russians.
General Mark Milley, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, at a Pentagon news conference with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin after they led a virtual meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. That's the 50 countries or so that have been arming Ukraine. National Review reports on 5 foreign policy bills debated on the U.S. House floor today. And the article reads, House Republican firebrands say they're seeking the end of out-of-date and wildly overstretched national emergency measures. Critics of a new initiative in the House and elsewhere, however, view it as liable to empower terrorist groups. House members will consider a series of measures that would eliminate ongoing national emergencies regarding Libya, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Congo. The resolutions would eliminate the emergency authorities granted by the declarations corresponding to each country and thus remove the legal basis for ongoing U.S. sanctions targeting bad actors there. That was from National Review, which also notes that declaring a national emergency is a requirement for imposing sanctions under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The first few speakers during the debate on the House floor were opposed to these bills, Republican Mike Lawler and Democrat Gregory Meeks. Then we'll hear a proponent, Republican Paul Gosar. First, Congressman Lawler.
I rise in opposition to House Joint Resolution 68 and all of this afternoon's privileged resolutions on this matter. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act created a process by which the President could declare a national emergency, create sanction authorities for that emergency, and impose those sanctions on the malign actors that are causing the emergency in the first place. While I agree with my colleagues about the need for congressional oversight and modernization of presidential emergency powers, I strongly disagree with the process by which they are trying to force change. The national emergencies we are discussing today provide the legal basis for critical sanctions programs targeting some of the most evil people on earth. Although some of these authorities were enacted years ago, many sanctioned individuals continue to pose a clear and present danger to U.S. national security interests today. These ill-thought-out joint resolutions, by terminating these national emergencies, would immediately eliminate these sanctions programs without allowing adequate time for Congress or the executive branch to establish an alternative sanctioning authority. It would also unfreeze sanctioned individuals' assets, immediately putting millions of dollars into the hands of some of the world's most dangerous criminals. Even if a new authority were created, these monsters would not be automatically re-sanctioned. Each of the hundreds of sanctions designations at issue today was built on strong evidence compiled over months or even years. It is not a switch that can be flipped on or off. More time and a lot more taxpayer money would need to go into redoing the work that has already taken place to renew these sanctions.
Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, on the House floor. He was followed by Congressman Gregory Meeks, Democrat from New York, ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Committee, also opposed to these resolutions.
For the next several hours on the House floor, we will not be discussing how to raise wages for the middle class, debating how to create a regulatory framework for next-generation artificial intelligence technology, or strategizing about competing with China in the 21st century. Instead, we will be debating a handful of resolutions that will provide immediate sanctions relief for human rights violators, illicit arm dealers, and terrorists with American blood on their hands. Now, I'm not being hyperbolic and I'm not exaggerating. The resolutions before us terminate emergencies that were declared for the express purpose of sanctioning war criminals.
Congressman Gregory Meeks, Democrat from New York, ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Committee, today on the House floor. The start of debate on 5 different resolutions to remove the presidential emergency declarations from years ago, and a case of one country 2 decades ago, from Libya, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Congo. In favor of those bills, Congressman Paul Gosar, Republican from Arizona.
Is it really what I heard? Is we're too lazy to do our job? Because that's what I heard. Every 6 months, we're supposed to come here to this floor and ante up in regards to the national emergencies. National emergencies, by its whole critique, by its whole name, is temporary and short-lived. Temporary and short-lived. I guess that's why I'd have to quote Milton Friedman. Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program. Boy, that says it all. That says it all. Now, there's a whole different way of getting to these perpetrators, these bad actors. We should do that. But we're rushing through this thing, and all I hear is, wait a minute, if we take these down, all these people are going to get off. Wait a minute, that's not what happens. Remember, we're bicameral. So the House would pass something, then it would go to the Senate, where most of the time it would die. But at least they might get something right in this case, as foreign affairs. They'd probably get something right in regards to who the people are and what is the vehicle to do this in. This is exactly why Senator Church did this in 1976, was to try to orchestrate how do we put this together, how do we have checks and balances, and how do we make this work for everybody. This isn't the way. We just saw a COVID national emergency. Today, there is not one inventory in that disbursement record. Not one of $4.8 trillion. That ain't chump change, folks. That's a bunch of money. That's a bunch of money. So I look at this and I will tell you, it's time to get rid of these national emergencies. We can do this. We can do it right. We can make everybody look all right.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Congressman Paul Gosar, Republican from Arizona, today on the House floor. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio at 11 a.m. Eastern, Israel's President Isaac Herzog addresses a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress. And live Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 2 IRS whistleblowers testify before the House Oversight Committee in the ongoing investigation into the Biden family. Listen on our free mobile app C-SPAN Now at cspan.org or on your smart speaker say, play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. From CBS News, President Biden met Tuesday with Israeli President Isaac Herzog at the White House amid lingering tensions between the two countries over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial plans to overhaul Israel's judicial system and settlement expansion in the West Bank. The president's meeting with President Herzog, whose position is mostly symbolic, allows him to reaffirm his long-standing support for Israel without embracing Prime Minister Netanyahu, who hasn't met with President Biden since he took office again in December. CBS News article continues. President Biden spoke to the Prime Minister by phone a day before President Herzog's visit, inviting him to meet in the U.S. before the end of the year.
Well, Mr. President, welcome back. Welcome back to Washington. Welcome back to the White House, and it's a pleasure to have you. And, we were together in Israel, and we're together again today. We've got a lot to talk about. And my love for Israel is deep-rooted and long-lasting. And as I often said, if there wasn't Israel, we'd have to invent one. And but 75 years, 75 years. It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe I remember about 2/3 of those. And this is a friendship I believe is just simply unbreakable. Unbreakable. And together, working to bring more stability and integration in the Middle East, and a lot of hard work. We got a lot more to do, but there's progress. Last year we convened the largest gathering of Arabs and Israelis in a decade at the Negev Forum, and we resolved the maritime boundary dispute between Israel and Lebanon, which people thought could never happen. We opened up an airspace for Israel and over Saudi Arabia and Oman after I had a little visit there. and we brought Israelis and Palestinians together at a political level at Aqaba and as well as Shram. And as I affirmed to Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, America's commitment to Israel is firm, and it is ironclad. And we're committed as well to ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. So we got a lot to talk about, but again, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's wonderful to see you again. I bring a message of greeting and gratitude on behalf of the people of Israel, the entire nation of Israel, from all sides of the political spectrum, all expressing great friendship and gratitude to you. As you said, it's almost a jubilee since you entered politics, and you've always stood by the state of Israel, the people of Israel, in so many issues. And I was pleased to hear about your conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, in which you focused on our ironclad military and security cooperation, because there are some enemies of ours that sometimes mistaken the fact that we may have some differences as impacting our unbreakable bond. And I truly believe that had they known how much our cooperation has grown in recent years and it's achieved new heights, they would not think that way. I also want to thank you, Mr. President, for pursuing more and more cooperation and integration in the region, for finding and looking for further partners for peace with Israel, and for cooperating on so many regional issues together. And finally, Mr. President, I know you have mentioned, and we will discuss that as well, the internal Israeli situation. As you know, I'm here, and I'm happy to be here, because tomorrow I will be speaking in front of a joint session of Congress, especially devoted to celebrating Israel's 75th independence. However, of course, my heart and soul is also in Israel, in the heated debate which we are going through as a society. It's a heated debate, but it's also a virtue and a tribute to the greatness of Israeli democracy. And let me reiterate clear, crystal clear, Israeli democracy is sound, strong, and resilient. We are going through pains, we are going through heated debates, we are going through challenging moments, but I truly believe, and I say to you, Mr. President, as I've said it as head of state to the people of Israel, we should always seek to find amicable consensus. And I agree with you on that as well. I'm pursuing it, even in these very moments, through my people, as much as we can, in order to find solutions and exit out of this crisis properly. Thank you, Mr. President, for your friendship, and God bless you.
Thank you for your friendship, and we've got a lot to talk about. Thank you all very much.
President Joe Biden and the visiting Israeli President Isaac Herzog in the White House Oval Office, the two not answering any of the reporters' questions. Up on Capitol Hill, the controversy over Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal's calling Israel a racist state continued today. The Congresswoman apologized for her remarks, clarifying that she supported the two-state solution and is opposed to Prime Minister Netanyahu's government and its policies. But Republican Congressman August Pfluger of Texas introduced a resolution that was debated and voted on today that states, quote, "The state of Israel is not a racist or apartheid state. Congress rejects all forms of anti-Semitism and xenophobia, and the United States will always be a staunch partner and supporter of Israel." Congressman Pfluger spoke on the House floor in support of his resolution.
It's a one-page resolution that I think every member of Congress should be able to agree on. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we've heard disgusting statements from members on the other side of the aisle against Israel. And I look at this debate here, this is the time where anyone who has said those types of things can come to the House floor and can debate, can have a conversation. If there's disagreement with this, well, let's let the American people hear that disagreement. But from my standpoint, we look at Israel as the most important partner in the Middle East. And tomorrow, in fact, as we welcome President Herzog to this very body, to the United States, to a joint address of Congress, it's critical for the U.S. Congress to send a unified message that we stand with Israel and that we unequivocally support our Jewish communities. There is no place for hate, for hateful words.
Congressman August Pfluger, Republican from Texas, on the House floor. On the Democratic side, there were different views on this. First, Kathy Manning, Democrat from North Carolina, in favor of the resolution.
Like the United States, Israel is not perfect. It has challenges, and it has policies that are openly criticized, often by the Israeli people themselves. But let me be clear. Israel is not now and never has been a racist state. That characterization is contrary to the facts. It is an untrue and unfair characterization that slanders our strongest ally in the region. Significantly, Israel is the world's only Jewish state. Prior to its founding, Jews suffered centuries of persecution with no country, not one, that would guarantee their safe haven. Since its founding, Israel has valued equal rights for all its citizens. It has provided a home to Jewish refugees from all across the globe, from Ethiopia to the Soviet Union to Argentina to Ukraine, all while living under threat from neighbors and terrorist groups dedicated to Israel's destruction. And yet, too often divisive voices are quick to demonize Israel. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Congresswoman Kathy Manning, Democrat from North Carolina, today on the House floor on a resolution dealing with Israel. Then there was this debate from Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan.
I am the only Palestinian American serving in Congress, and I have family members all throughout the West Bank and what many people call the illegally occupied territories. But we're here again, reaffirming Congress' support for apartheid, policing the words of women of color who dare to speak up about truths, about oppression, is just not what we should be doing here in Congress. And let's just get this record straight here. This is not something that's made up. The United Nations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Israel's own largest human rights organization, B'Tselem, all agree that Israel is an apartheid state. To assert otherwise, Mr. Speaker, in the face of this just body of evidence, is an attempt to deny the reality and to normalize violence of apartheid. This week, we're going to hear consistently that people touting about this is bipartisan support here. Well, don't forget, this body, this Congress, supported the South African apartheid regime, and it was bipartisan as well.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, today on the House floor before the vote on Congressman August Pfluger, Republican from Texas's resolution. And Congresswoman Tlaib will be joining some other progressives in the House of Representatives boycotting Wednesday's speech before a joint meeting of Congress from the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, also to boycott. Jamal Bowman, Democrat from New York, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, also planning to boycott. A story from the New York Times: despite temperatures climbing higher than 90 degrees Fahrenheit in some parts of the country, tens of thousands of Israelis held dozens of rallies across central Israel on Tuesday to protest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to finalize a law next week that would limit the power of the Supreme Court. In what has become a regular weekly episode of disruption, writes the New York Times, demonstrators marched through several cities in a renewed effort to stop the government proceeding with a binding vote on the law in Parliament, which is likely to come on Monday. This is the 28th consecutive week of protest against the judicial plan. Now to the U.S. economy. This story from Reuters: U.S. retail sales rose less than expected in June as receipts at service stations and building material stores declined, but consumers boosted or maintained spending elsewhere, which likely kept the economy on a solid growth path in the second quarter. Overall, the mixed report from the Commerce Department on Tuesday painted a picture of consumer resilience, though slowing momentum in spending growth. And that was reporting from Reuters. The chair of the White House Council on Economic Advisors, Jared Bernstein, was asked today about public perception of the strength of the economy in an interview with Heather Long, Washington Post editorial writer and columnist.
Riddle me this. I know you get this question a good bit.
why don't Americans give this economy a better grade? You've seen the polling, you know, it's like only 1 in 3 approve of the president's handling of the economy. Why do you think it's so gloomy?
Well, I think there are a few things. We're starting to see some improvement in the sentiment indexes. You know, the UMich index really popped up in its last report. 1 month, I don't want to over-torque on 1 month. I understand what you're asking about, Heather, and it's something, you know, I've looked at pretty closely. I think Americans have been through a whole lot over the past couple of years. I mean, a 100-year pandemic, the horrible illegal invasion of the sovereign nation of Ukraine, the supply chain snarl-ups we've talked about. Of course, you know, inflation at a year ago at a 40-year high. 2/3 of that has come off, which obviously is, you know, very positive. But having gone through all of that, I think people have been definitely somewhat shaken up by what they've been through. And I think what the president did when he got here was to say, we have to get back to normal as quickly as possible. It may take a while for that kind of renormalization to work into people's consciousness, but we're starting to see some of it now. I happen to think that a key part of that ingredient is real wage gains. That is, wages rising faster than inflation. And we're now seeing that, but that's a relatively new trend. So the last few months, we've seen wages start to beat inflation. And as that's occurred, we've started to see some improvements in these indexes. So that's answer one. People have been through a lot. It takes a while for things to normalize. And I think as they continue to do so, people will hopefully feel better. But here's another thing. Part of the problem is what folks are asking people about. If you want to understand how people feel about Bidenomics, you should probably ask them about the granular components therein. And if you do so, you get quite different answers. And in fact, something like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS Act, they poll way north of 50%. I think some of them poll north of 70%. It kind of comes down to this. I mean, if you go to Flint, Michigan, and you ask people, what do you think about replacing lead pipes with pipes that don't poison your kids? You're going to get a very high approval rating, and that at a granular level is what we're doing. Now, when you ask people about the broad macro economy, sometimes they divorce that from their own financial situation, which has actually improved in some ways in recent months, especially as inflation has come down. So I think there are a lot of moving parts there, but I think one answer is to really drill down and ask people about the more granular impacts of what we're trying to do.
Jared Bernstein chairs the White House Council of Economic Advisors in a Washington Post interview. Wall Street today, the Dow up 366, NASDAQ up 108, S&P up 32. When the U.S. House this week debates the reauthorization of the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, one expected amendment is a new proposal to allow 7 more round-trip flights out of Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. That's down from a proposed 28 flight increase that the advocates were pushing for. Reagan Airport is the only airport in the country subject to federal limits on flights and the distance of nonstop service. This dates from the 1960s as a way to keep it a short-haul airport, promoting the growth of Dulles International and BWI as the long-haul airports. Sponsors of this amendment held a news conference today led by Congressman Burgess Owens, Republican from Utah.
For nearly 60 years, the federal-imposed perimeter rule has made Washington Reagan one of the most expensive airports in the country. It's also the only airport in our nation that has been sheltered from the benefits of the free market by D.C. legislators. Those free market benefits of competition and meritocracy can be seen in every other sector in our society. It grants the American consumer the best prices, convenience, and value. This bipartisan effort will begin to modernize the arbitrary, protectionist federal policies put in place for the economic protection of one airport and one airlines. This bipartisan effort will instead put the focus on the priority of the American consumer. The millions of our constituents, the families, elementary and high school students, small business owners, and other D.C. visitors who have been priced out for years of the option to visit, learn, and redress their representatives in the nation's capital. We have an opposition that seeks to protect the status quo. The 60-year-old status quo is anti-consumer. Its biased nature and monopoly that seeks to stifle competition and send a clear message back home to the American consumer. That message, we are determined to keep our choices low, which translates to you as keeping your flight tickets and our profits high. Every American should have the opportunity to visit our nation's capital and witness their government in action. The D.C. Act will increase access to the constituents while working to decrease cost.
Congressman Burgess Owens, Republican from Utah, at a news conference today, surrounded by other supporters of this amendment to expand the number of flights to and from Washington Reagan National Airport. The House expects to start work on the FAA reauthorization bill on Wednesday, finish it on Thursday, and this amendment expected to be offered. The U.S. Senators from Virginia, Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, and from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen and Ben Cardin, all Democrats, wrote a op-ed last month opposing any changes to Reagan National's slots or perimeter rule. They wrote, "The system that promotes prosperity for all three of the Washington area's airports is not random. It is a carefully crafted effort to make the nation's capital accessible to as broad a population as possible. Destabilizing that system would benefit a small subset of people while negatively affecting surrounding communities. The case against doing so is clear. For the sake of our constituents, our economy, we're not going to give up this fight." Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.